Hi, I'm Cate, and I have the great pleasure, the honour of speaking to Riz Ahmed today about his extraordinary film, Sound of Metal. Hi, Riz.
Hi, Kate. The honor's all mine. I'm such a huge
Oh,
fan
well,
of
there we go.
yours. Thank you.
Honours at 600 paces. Look, we've only got 20 minutes, and I've got so many questions to ask you. I mean, firstly, congratulations on the film. It's such a beautiful, memorable film, and I've seen it twice now. And the screenplay, the idea of a heavy metal drummer who is in a codependent relationship, losing his hearing, such an extraordinary premise. And then you've got this incredibly sensitive direction, and then the sound design is so particular and integrated. But I'd like to sort of talk about all these things through the lens of your unbelievable performance. It's just extraordinary. You take us on such an emotional roller coaster ride. And I wondered, for those of people who maybe are listening to this and haven't seen the film yet, would you mind just sort of starting at the beginning and just talking through like Reuben's, the building blocks of Reuben's journey for those who haven't seen the film?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you pointed out, it's about a drummer who kind of tours the US with his girlfriend. They're very much, as you said, in a codependent relationship. They live in their RV, which is also their mobile studio. And they just travel from gig to gig, living this nomadic lifestyle, which is very self-contained and self-sufficient, but also very intense. And one day, Reuben suddenly loses his hearing. And that forces him to question his whole life, because he can no longer drum. But if you can't play the drums, if you can't be in the band, then can he be in the relationship? And it also triggers his past addiction issues. And so Reuben kind of goes on this journey from, thinking he's, a drummer in a relationship, to being someone who has to kind of, really his whole life gets turned upside down. In many ways, I kind of describe it in a similar way to COVID. You've got a workaholic who's hit by a health crisis, is forced into a kind of lockdown or a purgatory where he has to reassess who he is and everything that matters. So on that level, I think a lot of people can relate to it, but it's certainly a kind of profound questioning of the fundamentals of his identity and who he is.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk about that. It's so prescient and relevant, to all of us who've been so isolated, because he goes into like a profound isolated state. But and he's such a complicated onion. I mean, it's such an extraordinary character. And sometimes when you see a performance, and it's rare, you just cannot imagine anyone else playing that role. But it is, you did it so exquisitely. And I know that there's so many layers to him, because he's a recovering addict. And then he goes to these stages of hearing, losing his hearing, silence, and then putting the implants in and having to live in an imperfect world of sound. You not being deaf, you being an extraordinary rapper and musician, but not a drummer, and then having to learn to sign. Can you just talk through how you prepared? Like, where did you start? There's so many things you think, do I start with the signing? Do I start with the drumming? Where did you begin?
It's a great question, because it was almost overwhelming. And I think on some level I was looking for that. I think, the first 10 years of my career were all doing super low budget, micro budget indie films in the UK, often 18-day shoots, 100,000.
Four Lions, one of my all-time faves.
Right. Thank you. And I loved that process. And I'd just come off the back of this quite unexpected run of doing kind of bigger studio films, which are a very different beast, as you know. And, I learned some things and grew some new muscles, but I wanted to get back to something that was all in and that was overwhelming in the way that those really intense indie film shoots were. And so, when I saw what this role required and all that it was demanding, I knew that it would be overwhelming in the way that I was searching for. And I have to say, it feels like a blur, but when I kind of step back and look at it, it was doing everything at the same time, essentially. It was learning the drums every day with my drum teacher, Cate, for 2.5 hours, then doing sign language with Jeremy Lee Stone, my sign instructor, who became a very close friend and, helped immerse me in the deaf community in New York. doing that for a couple of hours every day. Of course, working on the script, working with my acting coach, and also working with my physical trainer, who was also hard of hearing, Leighton. So it was a kind of, 8 to 10 hours of kind of scheduled prep every day, 6 days a week for 7.5 months. And that was overwhelming, but I kind of feel like that's where interesting things happen, when you're forced to just kind of jump into a process and you can't really control it. You have to almost surrender to it. You have to just trust the process. That's when interesting things happen. And so that's kind of, the way that we prepared, and also the way that we shot the film. There was it was about surrendering to the process there as well, because we didn't have a lot of time. We were shooting on film. We were shooting in sequence. It was almost about, okay, we've done, all this months.
You shot in sequence.
Yeah. And that was, to the credit of the producers and Darius, our director, because it's such a gift. It means that you can live through the experience. And I think it just brings an added layer of authenticity. So all those goodbye scenes that were heartbreaking in the script, they're heartbreaking for us as actors, because we are saying goodbye as actors. We won't see each other again. When I say goodbye to Paul, it's the last time I'll probably be using American Sign Language, after using it every day for 8 months. And so, yeah, there was a lot of preparation, but also a lot of surrender to the overwhelming nature of it that was necessary.
You mentioned that scene. It's one of the most powerful scenes in the movie, when Paul Raci, another extraordinary performance. All the performances in this are just remarkable. But when he himself, coming from deaf parents, that both of your experiences seemed so lived. You'd obviously all that preparation. Like, no one wants to see an actor's homework. The work was so integrated. I don't know how else to put it in your performance, but also when Reuben has to leave, when Paul's character, who's leading the group, asks him to leave, that moment of shock. I mean, you obviously as an actor knew that that's what the scene was about. You're not doing a Ken Loach film where you find out in the moment. But I find as an actor, surprise is one of the hardest things to register. And it's just like surprise after surprise after surprise for Reuben. And each of them is rendered so differently. And so I just wanted to go back a little bit to that scene, and then afterwards, because he's cast adrift from the community. Obviously, he's a recovering addict as well. So were there any scenes like that? For me as an audience, that was one of those turning point scenes. Were there any things that really surprised you in the shooting? Anything that you were truly ambushed by, both as an actor but as a human being? I mean, those two things shouldn't be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, it's such a brilliant question. There's so much to say about that scene, but also the larger question you're asking, which is, there was, as I said, in this role, just that it was more preparation than I've ever done for anything. In some ways, I hope it's more preparation than I ever have to do again for anything. It was so intense and so kind of arduous for such a long period of time. But there was, we weren't preparing the scenes. We weren't preparing the performance. We weren't preparing where we would go emotionally. We were preparing to live inside these characters. So that, for example, both American Sign Language and learning the drums, they're kinds of nonverbal communication. And as you pointed out, I'm a rapper, spoken word artist. Words are a crutch for me. And so having those taken away, being forced to communicate nonverbally, really opened me up as an actor in a different way, really put me in my body in a way that Reuben would live in his body, as someone who communicates with his limbs on the drums rather than with his mouth. And so there was that kind of preparation, but we never rehearsed the scenes. We didn't rehearse or even map out what the emotional arc of the scene or of the whole journey would be. And so even though there was this preparation of living in the characters and learning these technical skills, it was a kind of an ideal process in that there was genuine spontaneity on screen. And just on to that point, I guess I want to say that, as I'm kind of geeking out with another actor, I kind of tried to bring a new process to this performance, to this project. Coming from the British tradition, which is a strong theatre tradition, there can be a lot of kind of text-based analytical work. And I would often lean heavily on kind of preparing the text and research. And, you know, there was a lot of research in this, but it was immersive research. It was about just hanging out in the deaf community, hanging out in the punk metal scene, playing the drums, signing, rather than intellectual, analytical work. And it just meant that I kind of feel like I was in my body in a very different way, in a way that was really liberating for me as an actor. And it meant that, you know, my body could be surprised by the moment and by the scene, rather than having things planned or mapped out. Sounds like an obvious thing to say, that you shouldn't map things out, but so often as actors, without even realizing it, we're sneakily doing that. You know, we give ourselves that safety blanket, and in a way, you know, preparing everything else other than the scenes, other than, you know, what was happening emotionally, I think gave us all the confidence and the freedom to be truly surprised emotionally.
It's interesting you talk about sort of being inside your body, and how physical the preparation was. I mean, obviously the drumming, and that was all done live in front of an audience.
Yeah, that was genuine.
Must have been really. But because the character is so on the move and so physical, and so what was heartbreaking about the performance is it, and what's so human about the way you realized him and his experience, is that he's always hoping the door's going to open, the next door's going to. There's so much optimism. He you know, but then until finally he has to he reaches this point of acceptance. And so for a physical character like that, who's throwing himself into the world constantly, what happens to him is actually wordless, and it's a very interior performance, and it's often really difficult to calibrate both those things. That's why what you've done is so remarkable. And then, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about the final moment, so you can just turn the sound down if you don't want to listen to it. There's a moment at the very end of the film when he hears the clock bell, and he hears it all broken, and that sounds extraordinary. I'd love to talk to Darius about that too. But he takes it off, and he's in silence, and something happens to Reuben, to you as an actor. You invite us into this profound, interior, subtle, energetic shift. It's like, for someone who has been living such an interior journey, he suddenly is incredibly still. And I wonder, I don't know whether you even want to answer this question, because sometimes it spoils things for an audience, but I was wondering what's going through his mind at that moment. It was, I mean, I was watching this far away from the screen. It was really magnetic.
You know, it's hard often to put these things into words, but I think, you know, talking about process a little bit, and how my process on this project was kind of different to often what it can be. Something that I was playing around with a lot, something that I was doing a lot on set, which I'd never done before, was meditate. Mm-hmm. You know, I kind of started bringing meditation into my work and into my process, because it's the act of letting go. It's the act of kind of letting things happen rather than trying to control things. And I think, and I don't know if you ever experienced this, but often the lessons you have to learn as Cate or as Riz or as an actor really mirror the lessons that the character is actually learning. And I think
sometimes they're a gift.
Right. And it's almost like the role finds you for a particular reason, because you as Riz or as Cate have to learn this lesson. You're at this point in your life. And just as Reuben, I think, had to learn about letting go of control and acceptance and stillness, I think that's something I had to learn. So I kind of undertook this kind of meditation practice really for the first time during the shoot. And in a way, when we got to that scene at the end of the shoot, because we shot in sequence, it was just about kind of surrendering, you know. I wasn't trying to hold on to a particular thought. It was more about kind of just letting go and letting the moment kind of move through you, if that doesn't sound like too much of a hippie-ish answer. But there was something about my own struggle with a meditation that mirrored, I think, Reuben's struggle around the idea of acceptance. And
it was an incredible moment. It wasn't even a performance mode. It was a being moment. They're very rare to see on screen. And I just wondered, too that what was the, how did this, if you go right back to the beginning, how did it come? Because obviously you're an executive producer on this as well, and you're a great lover of music. How did the project actually come to you? Like, because Darius co-wrote it as well. What I mean, the script is extraordinary, but what made you think this, I really want to completely dive into this? You were talking about wanting to do a different type of performance, but was there anything about the subject matter that because it's not very rare that you get invited into a life without sound on screen?
Yeah, I think it was about wanting to be out of my comfort zone. And on many different levels, I felt like this role offered that. It's always that kind of crazy combination, isn't it? Of like, I can really relate to this character and I'm nothing like this person. I don't know if I could do this. And if there's the right combination of those two feelings that you have when you read something, you're kind of really drawn towards it, and you can't stop thinking about it. So for me, what I could really relate to was this idea of being an obsessive kind of, creative, for better and for worse sometimes. And, like Reuben, I'd faced moments in my life and my career where I wasn't sure if I'd be able to continue doing this, whether for financial reasons or emotional reasons or, physical reasons of burnout. And I could really relate to that on a really kind of deep level. I could relate to Reuben's, I guess, control freakery and obsession and workaholism on some level, but there were elements in the script that were just so new to me. In particular, accessing deaf culture and accessing that world, it was just so far out of my comfort zone that my curiosity, I guess, really drew me towards it. And you're right, yeah, the script was absolutely phenomenal. The words just kind of jump off the page. It's one of those scripts where you just read it in one sitting, without stopping. But there was something, I guess, something in this that scared me. Essentially, there was something about this that was like, I mean, my first meeting with Darius, he said, listen, whoever's going to play this has to really play the drums. And we're going to do it every time you're playing the drums on screen, you're really going to be playing the drums. And it'll be in front of a real audience. I love music too much to fake it. It was just terrifying. And I guess I just wanted to kind of lean into that discomfort, lean into that fear in a way that's kind of what I'm often drawn to, is this perverse feeling of, I don't know if I can do this. And that's often what I'm kind of drawn towards in a weird kind of masochistic way. So it was a kind of curiosity of the unknown. It was the allure of the impossible in some way.
Yeah, it's so it's really amazing. And it's so, I keep using the word integrated, but obviously it's called The Sound of Metal, and it's about the sound is so much a part of it. How did you work with sound with Darius? Because there are stages that he goes, auditory stages that he goes through, and there's things that one can imagine, use your a leap of imagination, but it's very hard for a hearing person to imagine what it's like to hear, to live without sound, but B, to listen to scrambled sound. And so, speaking of extraordinary scenes, when he actually gets the implants turned on, and it's such a, there was such a profound understanding by you as an actor to allow someone like me who lives with sound to imagine what it was like to not. So how did you actually go about filming those scenes, given that you are a hearing person?
Yeah, so it was a combination of on one level, just research and speaking to people. There was so much serendipity throughout this shoot. I remember I was sat on a plane to New York next to someone who had cochlear implants, and we struck up a conversation. And he told me about how, and you can watch YouTube videos of kids getting cochlear implants and stuff, and often it's a moment of overwhelming joy for people. But he was telling me about how it was the worst day of his life, because of what he'd expected the experience to be and what it was in reality. And that conversation really stayed with me. Started other conversations with people in the deaf community. But what we tried to do to try and respect you know, on a sensory level, what that experience would be is use audio blockers. So these, we took these hearing aids and flipped them onto a white noise setting, and had them specially molded and put them deep into my ear canal so that I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't hear the sound even of my own voice. And Darius would activate them at different times. So early on in the film, when there's suddenly, all of a sudden the hearing cuts out, he would sometimes activate them at a moment when I'd be kind of surprised by it. And we only use those audio blockers, you know, we took a kind of a character, emotionally led approach, which was when Reuben thinks of deafness as something that cuts him off from the world and cuts him off from himself, we're going to use those audio blockers. But for those vast swathes of the film, when he starts to realize that deafness isn't a lack, it's a culture, that it's a way of connecting even more with himself and others, we didn't use those audio blockers. And actually I was communicating both, you know, on and off camera and sign language by that point anyway, because we were, you know, in amongst the deaf community at that point in the story. But we did use these audio blockers, and it was a really, it's interesting because it does kind of force you to listen to with your body, you know. And I always say that that's something that Jeremy Stone and the deaf community really taught me, was that the deaf people that I met in my time there in New York were the best listeners I've ever met. You know, listening isn't something you just do with your ears. It's something you do with your body. It's something you do with your attention. It's about holding space for someone else energetically. And to lose one's hearing forces you to listen with your body, to listen with your attention. And so it did do something, you know, in terms of putting me in my body. And, you know, it gave me a small glimpse into how destabilizing that sudden loss of hearing might be.
Yeah. Look, I'm being told, I've got my glasses on, I'm so blind, that we're going to wrap up. But there's so much I want to ask you, you know, about working with Olivia. The scenes between you are extraordinary. And I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, your performance is revelatory. And
thank you. Thank you so much, Cate, for your support. And it, you know, it means the world coming from you. You know, I've been a student of your work for so long, and yeah, I'm really, really, really pleased that you connected with it. So thank you.
No, my pleasure. And really nice to see you. Congratulations to all of you. It's remarkable. And for those who haven't seen it, it's really worth watching twice.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks a lot, Cate. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.